On November 18, 1978, 918 people were found dead in an event that history remembers as the Jonestown Massacre. Reverend Jim Jones, the head of Jonestown, was an American civil rights activist turned cult leader in 1955. He was charming, charismatic, and preached messages of equality to his followers, many of whom saw him as a sort of second coming of Christ. Jones' cult, the People's Temple, was located on a commune in the jungles of Guyana, a country in South America. Among the many members of the People's Temple was a family of 5. Due to his extensive fears about the Cold War and potential nuclear disaster, the father, Gerald Parks, joined the cult, along with his mother, Edith, his wife, Patricia, his son, Dale, and his 2 daughters, Brenda and Tracy. Even though she was raised within the cult, Tracy, the youngest of her siblings, was not at all happy to move to Jonestown in Guyana, but could do nothing about it. August 1st, 1977, Jonestown became the recipient of negative media attention after allegations of physical and mental abuse were made to the public. Despite this negativity, more and more devout and passionate followers of Reverend Jones packed their bags and headed for South America to live in this supposed paradise city, isolated from any communication with the outside world. On November 17, 1978, Senator Leo Ryan of California flew to Jonestown with a crew of legal aid, as well as NBC cameramen, in order to investigate this strange and peculiar society. Expecting to find an armed camp comprised of miserable prisoners, Senator Ryan was instead met with a beautiful and seemingly peaceful little village, full of laughing children, smiling faces, dancing, singing, and celebration. On the surface, it seemed that Jonestown was a lovely place, and none of the members of the People's Temple were being held against their will. During his stay in Jonestown, Senator Ryan, pleasantly surprised by what he had seen thus far, announced, "I can tell you right now that from a few conversations I've had with some of the folks here already this evening, that whatever the comments are, there are some people here who believe that this is the best thing that ever happened to them their whole life."
Here already this evening that whatever the comments are, there are some people here who believe that this is the best thing that ever happened to them their whole life.
However, unknown to the senator, Jonestown held a plethora of dark secrets. As a journalist accompanying the senator strolled through the community, a man discreetly handed him a handwritten note that read, "Help us get out of Jonestown." In reality, the members of the People's Temple were forced to work long, back-breaking hours, from 6 a.m. to nightfall. If they stepped out of line, they were publicly beaten with a paddle, while the other members of the cult pointed and laughed, a ritualistic sort of shaming and humiliation. Some members were even beaten 100 times with the paddle, resulting in terrible pain. Children were often separated from their parents, which was most devastating to the Parks family when they arrived in Jonestown. Tracy did not want to live in a different area than her parents with other children. She wanted to live with her family. But according to Reverend Jones, family relationships were selfish and sinful. The next morning, on November 18th at 11:30 a.m., Edith Parks quietly approached Senator Ryan and explained to him that she and her family were being held as prisoners in Jonestown with absolutely no means of escape. When the senator asked Gerlad if what his mother said was true, Gerald replied, "We've been here 7.5 months. We want to go home." "Well, you'll be back in the United States today," Senator Ryan assured the family. Gerald wanted to believe the senator's words were true, and he would save them, but knowing Reverend Jones, he couldn't help but have his doubts. Later that day, Senator Ryan, along with about a dozen members of the People's Temple, loaded themselves onto trucks, prepared to leave Jonestown forever. Although Jim Jones expressed his sadness to Gerald and Tracy, he did not make a scene, even when the most devoted members of the cult cursed and shouted at the defectors as they drove away. On the drive through the jungle, Gerald and Patricia just looked at one another, neither saying anything. As much as they wished they could feel relief and excitement, they were plagued with the crippling sensation that they and their children were all about to die. The trucks arrived at a landing strip in Port Kaituma, where 33 people began to board 2 planes that would take them back to America. Suddenly, along the dirt trail behind them, a truck full of men armed with guns pulled up. Without a second of hesitation, the men fired at the senator, his crew, and the defectors. 5 people were killed: Patricia Parks, NBC reporter Don Harris, cameraman Bob Brown, and finally, Senator Ryan. Others were left wounded and bleeding out on the landing strip as the truck full of gunmen retreated back into the forest. Tracy described her mother's murder, explaining, "I didn't see her get shot, but I saw her brains in the plane, and I saw her laying out on the ground." To make matters worse, one of the supposed defectors, a man who was merely pretending to leave while actually remaining completely loyal to Reverend Jones, pulled out a gun and shot Dale Parks, as well as another adult defector. Panicking, Gerald instructed his 2 daughters, 12-year-old Tracy and her sister Brenda, along with 3 other children, to run into the jungle and hide until they are called back. As fast as their legs could carry them, the 5 children sprint through the trees, running far away from the landing strip and leaving their surviving family members behind. The children spent roughly 72 grueling hours in the forest with no food, no clean water, and no shelter. Tracy fell ill with a fever and could barely walk, her state amplified by the lack of meals. The children were lost, tired, and terrified of the forest creatures Reverend Jones had regularly warned them about should they ever try to escape. "Go ahead and try," he would say. "Go ahead and try to run through the jungle with the panthers and the snakes." Still, the children persevered, sleeping in trees and sticking together as they waited for their families to return for them. On the 3rd day in the forest, the 5 children woke up to the sound of music that eventually turned into the sound of a generator. The children were worried sick they had been found by Jones and his cult. They wondered if this was it, the moment they were all to be killed, or worse, dragged back to the People's Temple and punished. But it was not Jones who found the children. It was the police who reunited them with their parents. Tracy and Brenda were overjoyed to see their father and grandmother again. They even reunited with their older brother Dale, who had survived his gunshot wound. However, their joy was short-lived as Tracy and her sister learned what had happened the previous day in Jonestown. For months, on certain nights, Reverend Jones would instruct his followers to drink Kool-Aid that may or may not be poisoned, to test their faith and their willingness to die for him. Gerald explained that he always knew the Reverend was preparing for a night in the future, a night where he would kill the entire population of Jonestown. On November 18th at 4:30 p.m., the entirety of the cult was encouraged to, and for some, forced at gunpoint, to drink Kool-Aid poisoned with cyanide, resulting in the mass death of hundreds upon hundreds of men, women, and children, their corpses scattered about the commune. Their deaths were not quick, but slow and horrifying, as the cyanide destroyed their bodies from the inside. In the deeply disturbing audio recording of the Jonestown massacre, among the screams of his people, Reverend Jones can be heard saying, "Die with a degree of dignity. Lay down your life with dignity. Don't lay down with tears and agony. Don't be this way." Oh God. It took years after returning home to America for Tracy to find peace after everything she had lived through. She spent most of her days as a teenager drinking, but eventually found the strength to speak out, stating, "If I keep quiet, Jim Jones wins." Tracy, her father, her grandmother, and her siblings are among the few survivors of the Jonestown massacre, as most of the unfortunate souls who joined the People's Temple were killed on that tragic November afternoon. What are your thoughts on the Jonestown massacre? What do you believe could have led so many people to voluntarily drink the Kool-Aid? Comment your thoughts down below and make sure to subscribe for more content like this.